Okay. So welcome to our Lunch and Learn for General Education. I'm Elaine Marcello, and I direct the assessment for general education. I'm also part of UCAT, the University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology, as assistant director for assessment there. So welcome today. I hope you're all enjoying lunch. We have plenty more if you need seconds. And what I'd like to do today is share with you our Board of Regents mandated assessment data that we have done for our first two assessments. So anyway, to get started, the Board of Regents in 2019 rewrote the script for general education for the three state institutions. They came up with a new policy for Gen Ed that included a little more detail about some of the areas that they wanted us to be assessing our students on and making sure our students were getting as far as information goes. So the policy also had a little clause in there that we were going to assess these outcomes that they felt were very important. But they also said we had to do it as a team of the three institutions. So we put together the assessment people from NAU, ASU, and us, and we started meeting in 2020. The first assessment that we attacked was written communication because we figured that was probably going to be the easiest to get done. And then the following ones were going to be quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and we left civic knowledge in American institutions for the last because we knew that was going to be the one that was going to be a little more tough. So the three institutions, we started meeting. We meet every other week, and we have been doing this since 2020. We work together to build the rubrics because we all have to use the same rubric. We brought in people from the writing area when we built the written communication rubric. When we went to quantitative reasoning, we brought in other people who specialized in that area. It has been a long project, an ongoing project, but I can honestly say that the Tri-University group is one of the groups that I enjoy working with the most. Everybody from all the three institutions are really, really pleasant. We work together as a team really well, and everybody contributes their fair share to the project. So, thank you, Ryan. The goals of the assessment were for two reasons. One, we wanted to have accountability. Well, the regents wanted our accountability to make sure that our students were graduating with what we say they're supposed to be learning. The second was improvement. And the real reason why we do assessment of student learning is so that we can make our programs the best that they can be. So if students aren't learning a certain area, then we can improve that area to help the students learn something a little bit better. So we approached it from this angle. We collect artifacts during the year. So in fall and spring, we collect artifacts that emphasize written communication. Some of you may have contributed those artifacts. And we also recruit scorers, and some of you were probably scorers for one of these assessments. We bring the people together, we calibrate on the rubric, and then run the assessment itself. We then have the accountability piece that we give back to the regents the following fall. We report out on that data. To give you an idea of how we are reconciling with the ABOR policy, we actually took written communication and aligned our rubric with what the policy is asking us to do. And so our accountability is there. The regions were thrilled. They really appreciated the effort that we put in to the alignment. But the data they actually asked for was pretty minimal compared to the data we collected. So Emily Jo, are you here? Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to our writing expert to talk to you about the rubric and the data for written communication, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about quantitative reasoning.
Thanks so much, Elaine. For those I haven't met yet, I'm Emily Jo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Assistant Director of Writing across the curriculum. And so I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind that was a challenge with this rubric is writing happens in many different ways. And so instead of focusing on artifacts that really represented only one type of writing, we wanted to gather artifacts that really represented the whole journey that students are on at these different universities and the different sorts of writing that they will compose. And so we really transformed a lot of those outcomes to provide more actionable language and strategies that are more context specific. It's very hard for reviewers in assessment when everything is so decontextualized. So we needed a rubric that could really support and help these multiple contexts. And so what we ended up collecting was for the early career students. They do directed self-placement for their English, for their writing, foundations writing courses. So most students take English 101 or 102 or 107, 108, but students write a letter assessing themselves and also articulating why they want to be in a certain course. And so these were the artifacts we chose because they really represent students at the earliest place in their career. So we had 364 artifacts. And then the late career artifacts are for students who have been at the university and have completed 75 units or more. And so we gathered artifacts from both general education and writing emphasis courses. And so as you can see, we had 364 artifacts for both. And what we found is students are writing and doing amazing. As we predicted, students are very much so attuned to the conventions of organization, especially, and thinking about the purpose of their writing. Early career artifacts did show that students might not have had opportunities to develop content as much or scaffolded learning opportunities that help them learn to articulate things, such as research or some of those ideas. And so it's very exciting to see that in the late career communication scores, students really illustrate growth in that area, as well as a better understanding of purpose of writing, which makes sense because they have encountered even more types of writing. And so the purpose has been articulated more and more. And so one thing that's really exciting for those who were just at the WAC portion is we do have evidence that folks who submitted artifacts that were WAC faculty fellows, their students scored higher, largely because, for many reasons, but an assumption might be students have language articulated for them because of some of the things that we talk about in the WAC fellows, such as purpose, audience, and that content development. And so we're excited that this was something, when we think about impact, to keep considering as an opportunity for faculty. And so we also found that there was very little statistically statistical differences between gender of both the early and late career. And we also looked at residency. These are a snapshot. We looked at many different dimensions, but there was also little statistical difference between students based on residency. Although we did notice that there was just kind of some range in terms of organization. And so we're curious how we can learn from our international students as learners to better inform our maybe domestic students as learners about things like organization. And so really what we recognized when we think about impact is having a connected curriculum so that connects early career students with late career students through an aligned curriculum between foundations, general education, and writing emphasis courses. So students are really able to transition between these courses and still look for common terms, common ideas that help guide them in the writing process. So for example, if instructors across their college experience tell students, this is the purpose of your writing for this assignment, students are able to more comprehensively and capably write for that purpose, which we then recognize through our assessment. And so also with WAC training, part of that is that common terminology, and then also understanding those expectations and designing opportunities for us to learn from students based on the data we collected, what areas and what interpretations they have in terms of writing. So for example, asking international students what they've learned about organization and how we can help others learn that as well. And then closing the loop. So these are the initiatives that we have done since our initial assessment, which is continuation of the WAC faculty fellows, as well as embedded tutoring. Courses with embedded tutors did score also higher on the written communication assessment. And then looking at WAC support, so WAC is writing across the curriculum, to help ensure students as they navigate between these different spaces and levels of their writing journey and career have an easier time navigating the complexity of different writing opportunities. And so that is really writing in a nutshell, and I'll pass it back to Elaine.
I don't know if you noticed on the previous slide, doing these assessments and getting everybody together, it was kind of like playing a game of whack-a-mole. So that's why we had the whack-a-mole on the last slide. So quantitative reasoning is the other assessment that we have completed. And this one was a little tougher to get started. Writing and written communication has, the literature out there about ways of doing writing assessment are really clear. Quantitative reasoning, not so much, especially when the Tri-University group got together. Because if you think about it, NAU is more of a liberal arts focused college. We're more of a science, STEM, research one based institution. And ASU is kind of somewhere in the middle. So each of us had a little different idea of what we thought quantitative reasoning should be and how we should measure it. So we got a group of people together across campus who had interest and expertise in quantitative reasoning, and we built our definition for QR. QR is the ability to draw logical conclusions from available quantitative information about a problem under study. It entails competence in critiquing, reflecting upon, and applying quantitative information, such as using numerical, graphical, tabular, or symbiotic representations in the context of personal, professional, and public life. It's the last thing I will ever read off of a PowerPoint slide. this was not an easy definition. It took almost an entire year to develop it. We had a lot of different ideas, a lot of different inputs from a lot of different people. But one of the things we really wanted to emphasize is that QR is not just about solving a math problem. QR is more about being able to look at a graph and interpret it and understand what it says. And we felt this was especially critical after we had some of our upper administration of the country talking about fake news and, things out there being put out that aren't true. So we wanted to make sure that our students could make their own decisions based on what they see out there in the news or online or wherever they're looking at. So the U of A rubric has got 4 areas: contextualize and evaluate, analyze, visualize, and quantify, interpret and apply, and communicate. And I don't expect you to read the fine print. All of this will be made available to you. So anybody who wants this PowerPoint, we'll send it out. We can also send out the individual rubrics. So everything will be available for you. But when we took our rubric or our definition of QR first to our tri-university meeting, the other 2 institutions had a definition that was completely different. ASU's focused more on statistics and math. NAU's focused a lot more on social science and humanities. So we decided that we were going to have different rubrics at the institutions for QR, but we would make sure that they were aligned with each other. So each of the 4 criterion that we have align with the other 2 rubrics and have the same idea, but functionality, they were a little bit different. So the way the reviewers read the artifacts, they were individualized for the institutions. The other thing that we did, looking back at the rubric, is we only had 3 levels of scoring and evaluating instead of 4. The written communication had 4 levels. We decided that putting it down to 3, first of all, minimized the variation and the variability between scores. It was easier to calibrate our reviewers on it. But it also, instead of having meets expectations and exceeds expectations as 2 separate areas, we felt that that meet or exceeds was kind of the same level. And so we put those 2 together at all 3 institutions. We had the 3 levels, and we found that it was much easier for our reviewers to score the artifacts this way, because it's a fine line, and sometimes it's a very subjective line as to what meets versus what exceeds. And so that's why we went down to 3 areas of our levels of evaluation. So how was the student work assessed? Well, first of all, I put a call out and begged, borrowed, groveled, pled with instructors from gen eds that have the quantitative reasoning attribute. And we got enough artifacts. We collected close to 1,000 artifacts, and we ended up using about 525 of them. We put the call out for reviewers, and all of the reviewers were calibrated by our QR faculty expert, Steve Kortenkamp, very kindly was our QR expert that helped with the calibration on the rubric. And all of the artifacts were evaluated by 2 different scores. So all the artifacts were scored twice. And if there was a difference of greater than 1 in any of the criteria, that artifact was given a 3rd read. Because the QR assignments varied so much, and some of them did not actually meet all 4 of the criterion in the rubric, we gave the scorers the opportunity to give an NA to any area that they really couldn't find in that artifact. So that instead of saying, oh man, they did terrible in this area, but the area really wasn't there, they could give an NA. So when you see the data, you're going to notice that each of the criterion are going to have different ends. And that's because we took the NAs out of that count. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that the majority of our students met expectations at their current level of study. So what the heck does that mean? That means that all of those students in the red that really was kind of, okay, yeah, they're emerging, they're meeting expectations, they weren't at the top of the heap. And that's because they probably were just freshmen or sophomores versus the upper division students who really exceeded expectations. Another thing that we had to look at were the majors of these students. Let's face it, engineering students are going to do a whole lot better on quantitative reasoning in some respects than a student that is in fine arts. However, it was kind of surprising when we looked at some of that data that some of the fine arts people have such great visualization that QR was actually pretty easy for them. So we saw that our students did okay. And when we looked at some other institutions that have done similar studies, our students were right there with them. You know, they evaluated about in the same areas as some of the other institutions that have done similar assessments. There was really no effect by gender over the different criteria. There was absolutely no statistical differences between any of them. However, when we would look at class, there are different numberings of the classes, different ends, but it looks like our sophomores did a little bit better than everybody else. And we kind of talked about it as a group and looked at it and said, well, you know, the sophomores are the ones who are thick in statistics and math and the QR gen ed courses. And so they've kind of got QR on the brain. And so they're probably paying a lot more attention to it than some of the others. So there's a lot of things we can say, a lot of conjectures. This is the first time that we did this study. And we really consider a lot of this as being baseline because it was at the beginning of our new gen ed program. It was at the beginning, the first year that the QR was an attribute for these courses. So we're hoping that when we do this assessment again, we're going to see a significant number of students in that top level versus the middle level. We hope. So the new gen ed is emphasizing the QR attribute, but unfortunately, we don't have the same, I don't want to say support, but the same look on QR as we do writing. We have writing across the curriculum. We have the tutoring center that emphasizes in writing, the writing center, but we don't have any of that for QR. So some of the things that we're hoping that we're going to be able to develop in the gen ed office is start doing some workshops in helping faculty develop signature assignments with quantitative reasoning to help scaffold these assignments, help emphasize the QR aspects of it so that we can build more robust assignments for students. We would love to develop a faculty learning community based on best practices in teaching quantitative reasoning. Very doable. We also would like to launch a quantitative reasoning across the curriculum. Haven't figured out an abbreviation, QUAC. Yeah, we could do QUAC. With faculty leadership, similar to what the WAC initiative is. And so these are things that we really, really would like to get going. Unfortunately, the morale at the university lately hasn't been all that great for implementing new and improved programs. So we will get there. This is something we're not going to forget about, but we are going to, as time goes on, hopefully we're going to get some of the stuff organized. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning, because of our technical issues, is the Board of Regents did mandate these assessments, but they also gave us money to do it. So they did do an unfunded mandate. They said, okay, you need to do these assessments, but here's some money to help you do it, which is why we have been able to pay our scorers for scoring artifacts. It's not a ton of money, but at least it's something in return for their efforts of scoring these artifacts and papers. So moving forward, what are our next steps? Critical thinking. We are in the thick of critical thinking right now. We're doing a little experiment with our experiment, and just about half of our artifacts are actually being pulled from the student gen ed portfolios. So those of you who may not be familiar with UNIV 301, all of our students create an e-portfolio. And in that e-portfolio are the 4 learning outcomes of the gen ed program. And students have to upload and identify work that they have done in their gen ed courses that align with the different outcomes and do a reflection explaining why this outcome was in this assignment and, what did they learn by it. So we're pulling artifacts that students have identified as being with critical thinking. So half of the assignments are coming from coursework that the faculty identified as being critical thinking, and half are coming from the students who have identified it. And so it's going to make for some very interesting data this summer when all of the reviews are done. And I'm really curious to see this one. The next assessment we're doing this year is another written communication. We're going to do a 2-year spot check on written communication. We're going to use the same exact rubric without any revision as we did 2 years ago. And we're going to use the same exact artifacts that we're using for critical thinking. So we're going to evaluate them because they're all papers. We're going to evaluate them for both critical thinking and written communication. 2 separate groups of scorers and the 2 separate rubrics. But everything's going to get evaluated for both. So again, that's going to be a very interesting set of data. And hopefully we're going to see some increase in student performance in the writing compared to 2 years ago. We're going to continue our WAC efforts, as Emily Jo said. We are going to develop some professional development opportunities. And I have Katie over here who's in charge of that for Gen Ed, nodding her head. So we are going to do that. And the last thing we're going to do is work on our civics assessment. Civic knowledge in American institutions is the 4th of the outcomes that the Board of Regents has mandated. The problem is that the regents have been much more explicit about this outcome than the others. And there are actually 7 individual things or parts to civics in American institutions that the regents want us to assess and make sure they're included in our gen ed curriculum. So this has been a little tougher nut to crack. We're working on it. We've had a task force for over a year working on it. We have a new task force that's being developed. So we have a lot of input from across campus, but that's our next set of duties that we have to get done is get the civics on the road. And that will be assessed next year. So we would like to thank you for coming today. We hope you enjoyed your lunch. And we have almost 30 minutes in which we can have questions. We have people on Zoom. For those of you on Zoom, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We have somebody monitoring that. Emily Jo is here to ask questions of. Please, this is your time to find out all of our assessment secrets. Not that we have any, but you never know. Yes, Lisa.
So you said one of the purposes for doing this is to see where we are, and the more important part of the purposes is so that we can decide what we need to do to make improvements. And so I guess my question is, across the things for which we have assessment data right now, does the general education program, so I'm looking around the room at all the people who are involved in this, do you feel like you have enough information on any of these things to begin to think about making changes? And are they changes in the program, or are they changes that are more granular, focused on, instructors or course structure?
I think at this time, there really changes all about faculty development, because we need the faculty to understand and be the best they can at teaching these different outcomes so that the students can be the best at learning them. So really, that's going to be our emphasis, especially until we get data again. So we're going to be redoing all of these assessments every 4 years, except writing. This year, we're going to do a 2-year. And I'm secretly hoping, and Susan's not here, so I can say this, I'm secretly hoping that next year I can do QR again for a 2-year spot, just to see if any of the things we've done have improved student learning. And then it's just then I think we're hoping to get more faculty input and get more faculty to see these data and give us input and participate in improvement across the board.
And really quick, I was just going to respond to and say what's nice too is with these mechanisms, we can hopefully then think longitudinally about students. So instead of comparing students who, some might have been in a pandemic, some might have not, and it's really hard to compare. We can instead start utilizing these mechanisms to actually think longitudinally. So that I'm excited about. But yes.
Before Emily asks her question, the other thing is we have all of those papers, the self-placement artifacts from students before they started. And I'm hoping 4 years from now, we're going to be able to find artifacts from those same students and do some comparisons. So we'll see. Fingers are crossed.
Hi, my name's Emily. I teach math. And I noticed that a lot of your initiatives are very teacher and instruction centered. I wonder if there's any discussion about updating the incentive structure at the university to value teaching, because annual performance reviews and promotion and tenure guidelines all but ignore teaching and emphasize service and research. So that feels like an important piece of the puzzle.
It is, and I agree. And unfortunately, that is outside my pay grade. That's Lisa's area. And so I'm going to put Lisa on the spot because she is the vice provost for assessment, teaching, and learning. So,
All right. Thanks, Elaine.
you're welcome.
Super appreciated. Yes, 100% agree. And we work in a system that was built on around what people thought universities should be doing many, many years ago. And once built, systems have a tendency to be little c conservative and to resist change. And so I think this is an area where our system probably has a lot of room for improvement and change. And we should think in systematic ways about how we can get those changes to happen. And it's not going, I wish if it were me, it would be done already. Although thanks, Elaine, again for this. But I think we're always sort of, we're moving in a good direction. But one of the things I personally, and not me as a representative of any old office on campus, one of the things I think it's very important for us to do as instructors is when we have annual review, or especially promotion review now, is to be able to reflect on what assessment tells us about what our students are learning and what our successes are. Not only this many students, it's easier to count them and talk about those things. And I think a lot of us as individual instructors have those data. And I would love for there to be more of an institutional push for us to actually sort of tell the stories that we can get from our assessment data in our individual courses about how students are learning. That's an important part of our jobs if we're involved in teaching. So I 100% agree with you and support that, and welcome any ideas that anyone in the room or elsewhere have about how we can work together to try to make that change as we move forward.
Following that idea, and wearing my UJEC hat now a little bit, how do we take this kind of process and start to evaluate individual courses? As you know, how do we bring this in so that the instructor can present that they are doing the job, but also so that we can evaluate in an objective way that is not traumatic to underpaid faculty and underpaid, overworked faculty?
I did not pay Brian to ask that question, but I'm really glad he did. So Brian said is his role in UJEC. UJEC is the University-wide General Education Committee. It is representatives from all of the colleges across campus, also from the library, all of the foundation areas as well. And they're the ones that review general education courses. They review policy. They make recommendations. They're really a big part of the heart and soul of the Gen Ed program. And one of the reasons or things that we considered when refreshing our general education program is our old program, the Tier 1, Tier 2 system, had zero accountability and improvement embedded in it. Once a course was okay to be a Gen Ed course, it never got looked at again. And we literally had some courses that were approved in 1998 that had never been looked at again. Several years ago, when I did some review of Gen Ed syllabi for Gail Bird, and I sent a call out to all of the Gen Ed instructors and said, I really need a copy of your syllabus. And I had several of them email me and say, I don't teach a Gen Ed course. Yeah, you do. No, really, I don't. I'm like, yeah, you're Tier 2 humanities. or whatever it was. And so Gen Ed lost its identity. And in the new refresh program, we said that's not going to happen. So as we have gotten into the program, we're only in it 2 years, so we still have some room yet. But what we would love to do and plan on doing is having assessment course by course reported so that instructors can report out on assessment of the outcomes that they are focused on or their attributes. And we're not evaluating their teaching. We are simply evaluating the student performance and how well students are learning the outcomes. We don't want to see grades. We just want to see how well students are performing at a certain level for an outcome. And so we're going to have a course by course system where instructors can put their assessment data in, and then every 5 to 6 years, all the Gen Ed courses are going to get recertified. And so you're going to have to recertify your Gen Ed course and say, I'm still upholding the Gen Ed guidelines and principles and policies so that we maintain integrity and that we have some accountability and we can help those instructors with improvement. So does that answer your question, Brian?
Worried about the trauma aspect.
The trauma aspect.
And the way I'm a little concerned about the effect on the individual instructors because, and I say this as a person that both is going to someday be, judge and the judger, if I'm still on
Right.
the committee, is that it's well and good to say, hey, how are your students doing? And yet the reality is when we're talking about, particularly in the Gen Ed, so many career track and adjunct or temporary short-term faculty, the stakes of this for individuals in departments across, I mean, maybe it's the demoralization you were speaking about earlier coming through, but right. I'm just really anxious about this and also want it to happen.
Right.
So
I know. The new program that we're using called Planning and Self-Study will allow us to upload the schedule of classes by section with instructors. And so we will be able to email the instructors and say, okay, and this is going to be with education. I mean, we're not just going to throw it out there and say, hey, you got to do this. But what we're hoping, and this is still just a dream, this is in no way reality, but we're hoping that these rubrics that we're designing for the ABOR assessments will be used by instructors for an assignment in class. And they will upload that data into planning and self-study at their course level. We can then pull all of that and anonymize it before it gets reviewed and before the data gets analyzed. So we're not going to be judging each individual instructor. We're hoping that all of the courses that have QR as an attribute, we can pull all of their assessments that they use the same rubric on and take a look at the data. So it's not going to be about, who you are and what you're teaching, but it's more about how are your students doing? And if you as an instructor don't feel like your students are meeting the mark, then hopefully we'll have some programs in place to help them. So, like I said, that's my dream. Whether it can become a reality, I don't know.
I think what's important to recognize too is in all of the data we've already collected, students are meeting the marks and they're doing great and they are achieving where we want them to be achieving. And so one thing that's also nice is because, as Elaine said, ABOR did provide some financial resources. We were able to leverage that financial resource to offer those who were doing the scoring paid professional development, which we oftentimes don't get to do because it's expensive. And that was also a way for folks who are overworked and undercompensated to have an opportunity to engage in professional development and learn about students and get in kind of the doorway in a way that where their labor was acknowledged and compensated. And so I think too, if there's opportunities where we can leverage those resources to think about reciprocity towards the instructors, but also the students who are gathering e-portfolios from, I think that's kind of a next step of this assessment that's really exciting that we can look towards too. Yeah, Gretchen.
I think some of my, and I don't want to, from a teaching point of view, it's interesting to see data that says students met or exceeded. But if I'm in my classroom, I'm wondering what met or exceeded looks like across. So I really want to see the data in a different form so that I can relate that to what's happening in the classroom. I don't want to see data that emphasizes fail, pass, as much as I want to see quantitative reasoning, I can't remember, one of visual interpretation takes these forms. It looks like an infographic like this, or it somehow I want to see clouds of examples statistically, not bar charts of fail and pass, so that I have a better sense of where I and my students are in what we're doing in a class.
To some extent, that's what we have built out in the calibration modules for these assessments so that we get all of our raters on the same page. And so we have examples of here's something that is, really, really good. And here's something that isn't quite there. And as we get further in and do these over and over again, then we're going to be able to improve those resources that much more, I believe. Like I said, we're still doing the baseline, and we're pretty happy with what we've gotten so far, but we know that there's room for improvement. But we can hopefully offer something a little more detailed like what you've suggested.
I think, too, it always feels gross to compare early and late career students rather than thinking longitudinally, especially given COVID and many of the other things. And so I think instead looking at student examples and facilitating conversations can be really meaningful. And then if instructors aren't seeing the sort of writing that they're doing represented in the samples that we've gathered, inviting them to share so that we can show what it looks like, but having that more authentic assessment. So it's also always a balancing act of what we can share for different audiences. Like, what do instructors need to see? What does ABOR ask for? What should we be sharing back out with students and things like that? But I think that's a great point, Gretchen, and I'll pass it to Tria.
So my question is about how we can collaborate with y'all, regardless of the spaces or places that we're in, especially given this idea of like anti-racist pedagogy that we just had the amazing opportunity to sit under. So what does using the assessment data that we know that was presented here look like if we're in think tank? How do we support students in developing those things? What does it look like if we are a staff person who's like an advisor? What does using this data look like? And I think really, really importantly, I saw that you all had like broken it out by gender and some other disaggregations.
All the different demographics you did.
What does that look like for some of our students who may be challenged, who are washed away in the overall piece? And what can we do to be more intentional about how we offer support, programs, instructions, that sort of thing? This is a really loaded question, so I'm very sorry.
No, that's okay. Like I said, Trio, this is our first run at this. And so what we were really hoping for this round is just to get the baseline data and then involve smart people like you to help us with all of this, the interpretation, and start having some forums and workshops. We had scheduled a quantitative reasoning form to look at the data before the ABOR report, nobody showed up. And we advertised it in the Gen Ed newsletter and a whole bunch of places. Nobody showed up. So we really want to have the discussions with everybody. It's really just finding a time when people can come together and do this, because this is not the kind of thing you can do asynchronously in a document. We need to have face-to-face conversations like this, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get those started, but we need the people to participate.
I would say too, like we could do I'm speaking for the wacky group. We could do a better job going to advisors and not having them come to us, because they might not realize that they are an integral part of the conversation. So us making sure folks know that we view them and value them as part of the community by going in when we're invited and make sure they want us there too, to be able to contextualize some of this. And as someone earlier in the WAC portion highlighted, some of these demographics are problematic for students who transcend them, or there's not, the language or the terminology that they identify with. So thinking about how we can do things like facilitate student portfolios where students are articulating their learning and have more choice, but also then communicating why that's valuable and also getting input in different ways. And I think there are some, it's not going to be just one conversation. It's going to be a series of conversations, and it's going to look like a million things. It might be an email back and forth. It might be going and getting coffee with someone. It might be having someone comment asynchronously on the WAC rubric in Google Docs and saying, I don't get what this word means. And then us being like, oh, well, that's great feedback. So I think also we can meet people where they're at to understand how best to communicate. But yeah, Melody.
So to kind of springboard from your conversations, I'm hearing a lot around ABOR, and I'm hearing a lot around faculty. But I'm not hearing student voice, and I'm not hearing industry voice. And I think those are maybe two audiences that could be brought into the conversation. And I'm just wondering if you have thought about that.
We have definitely thought about the student voice, and we have tried to get the student voice involved, but if you ever have, like you, Jack, we try to get an undergrad and a grad student on that committee, and it's like pulling teeth. So yes, students for sure. Industry is important, but I myself don't know how. If I was in a program, if I was in a major, I would know how to pull industry in to talk about this. But because I'm in the position of answering to the Board of Regents, I'm trying to fulfill what they want at this point in time. So honestly, I don't know how we can use, or how I could use industry at this point until we get further ahead.
Well, two recommendations. Student advisory boards, and you do have to have a little bit of an incentive for students to participate in these. So if you have any kind of seed money that you could give a stipend, even if it's a small stipend, then students will participate. And I have a student advisory board that's what we do. And it's really informative and helpful having focus groups. As far as the industry piece, I would reach out to ABOR themselves. They have connections and say, hey, we're really interested in having a voice from the industry. And there's partners all around Arizona who would probably like to give some voice to these assessments.
Right now, I'm trying not to talk to ABOR. I'm trying to keep a low profile. But I agree. No, I hear you, Melody, and I appreciate that. And that's why we're having this, is to get ideas and get people's thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, I just know I am so pumped for the critical thinking and the ones that students have identified, and seeing that, like, what a great place where we're actually starting to hopefully put into practice some of these things we are saying we value.
Okay. Thank you so much for you guys being here, giving us feedback, asking questions, and participating in our lunch. Hopefully we'll have more of these. We'll definitely have to have one after critical thinking comes back, because I think that data is going to be pretty exciting. We have a little bit of a break till we start the UCAT assessment stuff in the afternoon. So take a break if you're staying. If not, thank you very much for attending, and we hope you enjoyed your lunch.